that okay? Or? Yeah. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2. My name is Alyssa. I am part of the World Movement for Democracy team, and I have a couple of housekeeping notes this morning before we get started on the panel. So could I get everyone's attention real quick just before we begin? The first housekeeping note for today is just want to remind everyone to please return your interpretation devices at the end of every evening, and then you can get a new one the next day. We also have a lost and found, so if you think you've lost something, please come find a member of the NED staff outside of the Swan Room. Cash allowances for folks that are cost covered are in the Peacock Room. Finally, turn on your app notifications. We are sending updates throughout the day, and make sure you check your messages as well. And finally, on Democracy Lounges today. So yesterday we all saw and experienced the importance of culture and art and music, and we're continuing that theme with 2 of our Democracy Lounges as well. So at 15:45, our partner Garden of Hope will demonstrate how they convey gender issues in Taiwan through theater. And at 1600, please come by and stop and chat with Abdul Amal, to hear the untold stories from Iraq through the medium of poetry. And now we'll be turning it over to our morning panel discussion. Thank you.
大家好. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this morning's session. My name is Kathy Tai, Deputy Regional Director for Asia and Pacific Program at Center for International Private Enterprise. As native of Taiwan, I personally have benefited so much from democracy and market economy here in Taiwan. These are foundation for prosperity and continuous opportunities for local people. And SIPE's work is a validation of that. So today, I'm very happy to welcome SIPE's Executive Director, Andrew Wilson, for some remarks.
Well, thank you, good morning, and welcome, and it's my pleasure to be with all of you here today. You know, if you're looking for new ways to defend democracy and enlarge civic space, you're in the right place this morning. We have the privilege of opening day 2 of the Assembly with a panel discussion on alliances to enlarge civic space, how do business and civil society combine forces. SIPE is the business institute within the NED family of institutions. We bring a private sector perspective to the Assembly, along with our partners from the Free Enterprise and Democracy Network. We welcome the opportunity to converse with our friends and colleagues from civil society in the wider democracy community, and I'd like to thank the NED for giving us this opportunity this morning. The premise of this session today is that business and civil society must work together to counter authoritarian threats and specifically to preserve civic rights of freedom of association, freedom of expression, and others. Collective action across sectors of society is a powerful antidote to authoritarian tactics of playing one constituency against another. I remember at the Dakar Assembly, we had another business and civil society panel that called for building trust across these sectors, linking their respective dialogue initiatives and forming new alliances. Those are good recommendations that they made. But how does one go about actually doing this? Such collaboration really is still new territory for many of us. And the task of our panelists is to shed light on different modes of collaboration. For those of you who may be wondering where business fits in the democracy community, this question goes back to the founding of SIPE in 1983. The fact is that business has a stake in an open, well-governed society, and independent business acts as a counterweight to the state. Its talent, resources, and constituencies make the private sector a potentially valuable ally to civil society. Moreover, open market economies based on individual liberty, rule of law, and equality of opportunity serve to foster pluralistic societies and accountable government. We like to say that business needs democracy, and democracy needs business to thrive. I was at a meeting with President Tsai earlier in the week, and she made the observation that Taiwan's own semiconductor industry, its great success story of global commerce, could only have happened in a democracy because democracies provide the freedom of thought and innovation and ability to maneuver so that very complex industries like semiconductors need to thrive. And I agreed with her 100%. Taiwan is a perfect example of how democracies and business and the private sector and economic growth really reinforce each other moving forwards. Forging collaboration is, in a large measure, though, an exercise in building trust. Often civil society does not understand the role of business in democracy. While business can be complacent, blind to the authoritarian dangers ahead, until it too becomes a target of regulatory action and crackdown. Last year, CIPE conducted opinion polls in Tunisia, Ukraine, and Bolivia, which examined attitudes towards the private sector. Those polls found that the public expected business to take a leadership role in the economic recovery, and that business actually enjoyed higher trust than almost any other institution in the country. At the same time, the public expected business to be a better partner with other segments of society. And besides trust, there are practical questions of when collaboration makes sense, where to begin, what methods to use, and so on. We need models for action and skills for sustained cooperation. Fortunately, today we have a panel of think tank executives and business leaders who can speak to the interaction of civil society and business and some forms of cooperation that are possible. Just to give you a flavor of the possibilities, CIPE has seen cooperation in such areas as grassroots initiative for community development, joint advocacy, youth education, cross-sector funding relationships, public budget monitoring, and efforts for inclusive growth. While there is shared value in these efforts, the question remains of what else must be done to defend civic space. The Free Enterprise and Democracy Network, or FEDN as we call it, for instance, has called for more proactive monitoring of threats to freedom of association. Collective action on rule of law is another area ripe for cooperation. And I hope to hear of new ventures that you dream up during this assembly. The road ahead is long, and time is short, as Maria said yesterday. So let's hear from the panel about how we can all get started on this journey. I'm going to hand it back to Kathy Tai, who are going to introduce our wonderful panel of partners from around the world. Kathy, over to you.
Hello again. So now I would like to invite all the panelists on stage. Yes, here. So let me say a few words to introduce our panelists before we start. So first, I would like to introduce Mr. Wojciech Szybowski. He's a political analyst leading strategic foresight in CEE on Europe affairs. He's currently the editor-in-chief of Visegrad Insight and president of the Res Publica Foundation. He's also the founder of the New Europe 100 network of digital age leaders from Europe and Eastern Europe. Second, I would like to introduce Uni. Uni is the manager of the public finance unit at IDEAS, Malaysia's think tank that aims to improve the level of understanding and acceptance of public policies based on the principles of the rule of law, limited government, competitive market, and free individuals. At IDEAS, she leads and manages research and advocacy projects on government procurement reform, budget transparency, state-owned enterprises, and the governance of major infrastructure projects in ASEAN. And next, Toki. Ms. Toki is a business development consultant interested in the growth and development of small and medium enterprises. She's Vice Chair Africa for the World Chamber Federation, immediate past president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the National Vice President of the National Association of Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Mines and Agriculture, NACIMA. She currently sits on the board of a number of organizations, including Youth Enterprise Development NGO and a coalition of women business associations in Nigeria. Last but not least, Catch. She is governance relations expert working at the intersection of business and national development. Currently leads work on Makati Business Club's governance program, including meetings with cabinet secretaries, leaders in Congress, and key Metro Manila mayors. She also supervises projects on digital cities and government transparency. So welcome, everyone. So as Andrew said, today this panel is to explore the possibilities for collaboration and to find common ground between the private sector and civil society. And so I would like to start the conversation by asking each panelist to share a little bit on why collaboration between private sector and business is so important, and what are the ways for them to work together. So maybe we can start with Catch.
Sure. At Makati Business Club, we really think that working with the civil society is one way that we can help push our common advocacies. So we have 3 models of working with civil society. We support them with concrete resources. We work with them to push advocacies on government transparency, and also we do knowledge sharing. So on the first point, supporting with resources, we work with Internews on the Ads for News project, where we pitch our members to transfer 2 million of their ad spending budget towards local news organizations instead of social media, on knowledge sharing and on supporting them with common advocacies. We work with the Right to Know Right Now coalition. We've worked with them for the past 30 years, and this coalition is made up of labor leaders, made up of climate activists. We may agree on no other issue, but we both agree, and everybody in that coalition agrees that freedom of information is a good thing. And on the last point, we also join all of their forums. They invite us to, we also do trainings with them. We use our network of business leaders to support civil society.
That's a great point. Like when you talk about ads for news, basically if you want to change the behavior of the private sector or the business, how to really think about the incentives, how do you change the incentives so then that leads to behavior change is a great point. So maybe we can come back to explore that point later. So Toki, maybe you can share a little bit about your experience in Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Kathy. In my environment, we have had a history of moving very quickly from colonial rule to military rule. And so there's a lot of distrust, and it's mutual distrust, between private sector and civil society. And the outcome of that is that civil society have sort of gained a reputation as activists and rebels. And when you have a situation where the shrinking of civil space is actually done by government itself, where government is the largest spender of monies, you have a situation where private sector is concerned, there are fears around loss of revenue, there are fears about being frontal and antagonistic with government. Civil society seems, on the other hand, to lack an understanding of what the challenges of private sector is. And so with us, it's a very fragile sort of situation, looking for and finding ways to collaborate. However, COVID sort of changed all of that, because all of a sudden, what was going on affected everyone, and it didn't matter what sector you were in. And so we found that where it concerned health, where it concerned education, there was quite a lot of collaboration going on between civil society and private sector. And so I do happen to sit on the board of trustees of a youth-focused, youth-managed, youth-driven NGO that we started in 2019, known as Lagos Island Connect. And the thought behind this was, here's a huge demographic, very important to private sector, very important to the growth of the country, and a very important political demographic. And we sort of thought that if we turned everyone's attention outwards into this demographic, maybe we could sort of find a new model by which we could collaborate. And so with Lagos Island Connect, we have stakeholders from civil society, we have private sector providing resources, we have youth at the heart of what we do, and we also have partnerships with the state government. We're just 3 years down the road. COVID slowed things down a little bit, but it's been a good experience. It's one that we're hoping will be replicated across the country. And that is one of the models that seems to be quite unique and seems to be working for us. Having this common interest in which all of you would want to collaborate and invest in.
It's wonderful that you talk about just kind of the different perceptions from the private sector and civil society, and how that could actually be the barriers for initial conversation and outreach. But COVID, changed that. So that's an example that really shows the solidarities, in difficult times, and how everyone should really stand together and then, advance the common goal. So that is a great example. Uni, in the case of ideas, I know you have done quite a bit to reach out to the private sector, try to form partnerships. So maybe you can share a little bit of your thought on this.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'm glad that Toki mentions about this sort of differing perspective in between these two actors, right? Where business sees civil society as nuisance, rebels protesting all the time, not knowing the context, while civil society sees private sectors as piggybacking governments, wanting free things from the government all the time. So there are very different sort of perceptions in between these two actors. And I think what we do in Ideas, we try to provide platform for these two differing points of view to sit together and see whether there's some sort of, the same issue that we can work together. And I think one of the catalysts, I think in the case of Nigeria, would be COVID. For us, it's a huge scandal that I think everyone in this room now, which is 1MDB. And these big corruption issues affect the whole country because political corruption is at the root. And it then exposed how bad the political corruption in Malaysia. And for us to see there is a need for regulating political financing. While we are doing this, we try, in Ideas, we try to develop these legislations on political financing. I think one of the cornerstone is transparency. Mm-hmm. But then there is a fear among the private sectors. If our names are going to be exposed there, my chances of getting government contracts will be reduced. So I think for civil society, we long have been advocating for transparency without knowing that there may be some negative implication for private sectors. So I think creating this communication in between is very important. Another issue that we work on is BRI, Belt and Road Monitor. And I think Ideas has been pointing out the lack of governance framework for procurement for state-owned enterprises, which make Chinese capital, which already destructive in the first place, become even more destructive because we don't have that governance framework. And we figure out that one of the problems is then it affecting local contractors, it SMEs, right? The small, medium enterprises. They are affected because not only, of course, they are at some point being included in the contracts, but then they lost workforce. So I went to one of the states, I think last week, and talked to some contractors, and they say, the Chinese companies pay better wages than us. If they go, we have to pay the same thing, and we cannot compete. So I think this is something that I wouldn't know if then we don't have this interaction between civil society and businesses. So I think for me, why collaborate is because we can get a differing point of view that maybe as a civil society, we actually didn't have that view before. A second one, just another minute, is actually, that's what the benefit of us engaging the private sectors. For private sector engaging us, is to actually using us as to aggregate their views. In countries like Malaysia, where different political opinions sometimes harmful, it may not get you jail, or sometimes jail, but many times you lost the opportunities for contracts, or you're being sidelined by government. They cannot speak up. So civil society actually can provide that platform where they can safely say whatever they like in our forum. We always said, it's a Chatham House rule. We won't tell you who coming here, but we know what your grievances. And then as a civil society, we have that platform to air out whatever grievances from private sectors safely, even to the government. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Uni. Wojciech, before we continue, I would like to acknowledge, it's really our honor to acknowledge the presence of this special guest. Taiwan's Digital Minister, Audrey Tan, is here with us. Audrey is Taiwan's digital minister in charge of social innovation. She led Taiwan's first e-rulemaking project. She also actively contributes to GovZero, a vibrant community in Taiwan focused on creating digital tools for civil society. Thank you so much, Audrey, for your presence. So we now continue our conversation with Wojciech. So maybe you can share a little bit like how your organization or how your work, from the civil society's perspective, have contributed to the collaboration of partnership with the private sector.
Sure, I'm happy to mention that also, but let me shed a light in a broader perspective. I come from Poland, a country that has experienced tremendous growth over the past 30 years, that the foundations of which were laid by a unique collaboration, you wouldn't say of entrepreneurs or business, but of workers and the unions, with the civil society, which at that time were lawyers and journalists, that transgressed this space and built together the great solidarity movement. Well, that started some 40 years ago, and that brought about major change and transformation, highly supported and assisted by the National Endowment for Democracy, among others. And these 30 years of prosperity within this space, we've seen not only democracy grow, but especially undisturbed, nearly undisturbed period of prosperity in which businesses thrive and entrepreneurs have grown. Perhaps from workers to micro companies mostly, and now majority of the population in Poland is employed or self-employed as micro entrepreneurs. And in this very context, Poland has been in the recent months the country that was the country of refuge for people crossing over from Ukraine, war-torn Ukraine. And in that space, that particular space, I wanted to talk about how this business and civil society collaboration is materializing today, which is, I believe, quite a unique story and a learning experience. So just to give you a numbers, in a country of 40 million, we had 7 million people crossing the border of Ukraine in the recent months since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Some 53% of businesses in Poland, entrepreneurs, got engaged in assisting refugees in different ways. These numbers were higher among bigger companies. The bigger companies accounted for about 86% of bigger companies, larger enterprises in Poland, been engaged in assisting refugees in Poland in various ways, and I'll go later in our discussion how it happened. There were about 40% of micro entrepreneurs, so those who basically nearly make their living by being entrepreneurial and self-made men in this business environment, and they still brought some assistance, 40% of that business owners. And what is most interesting, and where I want to build on a little bit further and elaborate a little bit further in the discussion, is what we also put emphasis and invest our work as a think tank and a media platform, is that 17% of all businesses got engaged in direct support by giving out their own goods or investing their own services in assistance. Just imagine 7 million people crossing over to a 40 million country, and you don't necessarily see any refugee camps or isolated settlements of those people. People were welcomed at homes, but mostly people were welcomed in differently appropriated business mobilities, the offices, hotels. Most of hotels, most of office space that were on the road of those people who were coming to Poland were made available, and businesses didn't care that much at least for the first months until summer, how to earn money, but how they were caring how to assist those people who are coming. So I think there is a story to be told, and I'm happy to discuss it today, how about 300 entrepreneurs created essentially a WhatsApp group out of not having any sort of established organization to conduct business business philanthropy or venture philanthropy. And they managed to organize large parts of shipments. They managed to bring about, for instance, by May, 34 wagons of train with 500,000 tons of goods to war-torn Ukraine, just of their own belief that out of having so many decades of being enjoying prosperity, but also being assisted to develop that prosperity, it's time to give back. And the big question of today, that our organization is invested in, together also with SAIP, is how do you build on that experience, how to make it sustainable. So one of the ways, and I'll stop here with this remark, that we have experimented and successfully so, was to establish this informal group of people who earlier communicated just on a WhatsApp group and plug them into United Nations humanitarian response to the refugee UNHRC. That was perhaps for the first time ever that UNHRC National Response Plan involved businesses to the main stage next to civil society in order to bring together this collaboration together. But the challenges are very similar to what you just said. How do you build interface? How do you link small grassroots organizations with businesses that essentially are all about scaling up and professionalism to the levels that civil society very often is unprepared for? How do you make the most of the potential, and more importantly, how do you make it sustainable? So I'm happy to discuss it further.
This is very compelling examples that you gave. And then also through first round of questions and answers, I feel like we've got different models of collaborations, through information sharing, for instance, the media platforms that you have, or through joint advocacies, through youth training, through capacity building. So I feel like there are a variety of ways for collaboration. So maybe we can go back to Catch, share some models that have been successful in your experiences working with civil society organizations.
Sure, Kathy. But before that, I just want to point out, I found it super interesting that among the panelists here, the collaboration between business and civil society stem from some sort of crisis or governance lack. So in our case, Makati Business Club started in the wake of the 1980s dictatorship in the Philippines. So we were started as a way to engage the government when basically the other business associations can't or wouldn't. And it was interesting to see that reflected as well in Uni's experience with IMDb and the general transparency crisis that it was causing in Malaysia, and also Toki's case of COVID-19, and Wojciech's case of Russia's invasion of Ukraine as causing that kind of gelling mechanism. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that we have common interests. Business and civil society have common interests, and it shouldn't take a crisis for us to realize that. On our points on really successful models, I want to really cite our work with the Right to Know Right Now coalition. Mostly because of its longevity. I see that others on the panel here, they're very recent initiatives. But this initiative has been going on with them for 30 years. And I think our main success there has been keeping the whole coalition together, despite our very differing views on other things like labor, other things like environmental support or ESG. One thing that we work with them is always to create a private caucus. So when we were pushing forward the Freedom of Information Bill in the Philippines, We always met with civil society beforehand, so civil society and private sector sitting together to discuss our concerns with the bill and what provisions we wanted to forward. The point of this is that so we are able to present a united front when we're already talking to the lawmakers. So it's clear that the support for this bill is coming from all sides. Another model that I want to cite for support is actually inspired by Audrey Tang. We had an event with her last 2020. It's nice to see you in person and not just a little Zoom box. But we worked with the governments, with the local governments in Metro Manila to create ways for them to consult their citizens digitally. So much responsibility was delegated to the mayors of Metro Manila during COVID, and they were scrambling really to figure out ways to consult their citizens and to ask if what the policies they were implementing at the time were correct. So we work with civil society organizations, data analyst organizations, church groups, activist groups, to help create like a mechanism for the government to consult them on any new like quarantine restrictions or any new COVID-related transport policies that they might push forward. Sorry, turning to the rest of the panel now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Catch. I really like your comments on why it would take a crisis for us to work together, right? So we should look beyond the crisis time and then really try to find common ground even in normal times. So Toki, can you share a few words on like successful models?
Yeah, I think my thoughts around this is that something must kick off a relationship. In my view, okay, yes, it's taken a crisis to start it off, but then how do we sustain it?
Yeah.
The point is we now have an opportunity to experience each other, and through experiencing each other, begin to have agreements around exactly what we want to collaborate on and what is the way forward. In terms of my experience and our experience in Nigeria, like I said, it's been fragile. And it's been around, so for example, some civil society organizations have a good relationship with some media organizations. Certainly not the government-owned media organizations, usually the private-owned media organizations. And even they have to be careful about what they publish. There have been collaboration around legal services, which are services that the CSO really and truly require. Especially when they get into trouble with government. So you find lawyers like the Bar Association offering free services. So we did have an incident in Nigeria shortly after Black Lives Matter in the US, which is called EndSARS. And it was an uprising by the youth against the law enforcement agencies of the country. And you found the Nigerian Bar Association offering their services completely free of charge across the country to help the youth. Then, of course, we've had it around education. And when I say education, I really mean civic and voters' education, because part of what is happening at the project that I mentioned, it's actually an attempt to look beyond crisis. The idea itself did not come from a crisis. It happened before the crisis, but COVID helped it along, you know. And we're looking to co-create now. So we're co-creating with government on one side, with private sector, and with the youth themselves, drawing up annual plans, thinking of what it is that will benefit the youth going forward. And then there's the big hole around academia, the necessity for think tanks and research work, data and information. So there's some one-offs that are going on between private universities and CSO as well. So, you know, there is such a scope, such a huge scope for collaboration between CSOs and private sector. And it really benefits both sides to collaborate. We've seen it, it's been demonstrated. For us, at least in the last 3 years, we've seen what it can do. It's enormous. Private sector obviously has the resources that are required to get things done and to meet objectives. But you know, on the other hand, CSOs need to begin to understand business They're very passionate. It's all about, you know what, I'm ready to die over this matter. Business is not ready to die over anything because they really need the revenues coming in. So we need to find that space of common agreement, you know, where we begin to be a lot more strategic. I think it's all about strategy, about our partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toki. I like the key word of co-creation. And so how do we co-create something that's sustainable and then long-term? I think that's really important. I do want to remind the audience that we will open up for Q&A time after a round of questions and answers. So prepare your questions. If you have any questions you wanted to ask, we will give you time. So next, let's go to Uni to share some models with us.
In the area of governance, civic space, improving democratic institutions, as I said earlier, I think we are still in that early stage. I think many organizations, including IDEAS, is sort of trying different models. We have this coalition, we call it Rasuah Busters. Rasuah means corruptions in Malaysia. There's a media organization there. There's owner of, I think, executive from oil company. So we tried to discuss there, but it's still very early stage. But I think one of the models that actually that quite established in Malaysia, probably for other topics, for example, vulnerable communities. I think there's a lot of collaboration in between private sectors and civil societies in that regard. For example, our work, ideas with Orang Asli, which is the aborigines of Malaysians. They are sometimes a group that are quite sidelines in the development because of the way their way of life. So IDEAS and other civil society organizations work with companies like Sime Darby, Petronas, try to understand and figure out like what are missing in the policies and intervention done by the government and also private sectors, because they've been doing a lot for the aborigines, right, for the Orang Asli in the past so many years. What was missing from this? I think so the conversation, consolidating, aggregating all these efforts, we need to do this. We need to sit together so that our intervention will not be patchy and we can collaborate. And in that conversation, we need to also include the Orang Asli themselves, because they are the one who, you know, who knows the problem. We're not coming to tell what to do, but we are here to facilitate. So I think that model, we are trying that now, but not so much in, of course, civic space or governance. But I think we are hoping by giving space to the most vulnerable community in our society, which is Orang Asli, will provide that greater civic space. It's not necessarily on, you know, freedom of association, but I think that kind of collaboration we are hoping to continue in other areas as well. So that's, I think, one of the models that we are trying to do.
Very, very well. Wojciech?
Sustainability. We hear often from colleagues from the United States that come to Poland, and they call us, as Poland, the biggest NGO in the world or humanitarian superpower because of the facts that I have just presented to you. But I think what should be recognized is it's not only Poland, it's Slovakia and Czech Republic, to some extent also Hungarian society react in the same way. Why I'm saying that? These countries have been recipients of refugees and the businesses are also involved there. The way for sustainability, at least the way we see it and towards which goal we are working in my organization together with those businesses, is to establish a Central European network collaboration of those who actually want to look beyond. By now, we are already in autumn, so 6 months into this situation, 6 months into the crisis, businesses have almost lost their steam in terms of how much more they can sustain this support. So this beautiful story, hopefully it's not coming to an end, but definitely has a moment, if not of pause, then a difficult moment currently. One of the reasons is, of course, that there is no government assistance. The government did not make any contingency plans or didn't plan for collaboration for make this effort sustainable on the longer run. But The promise is there, that's for the businesses, at least those who are engaged, that they know that by themselves, many entrepreneurs establish their own foundations. They're not going to make a big difference. But if they come together, they may see that when some of them fall short of the resources they have, the others may be still pushing the cart together. And overall, by establishing something bigger, they achieve much greater goals. So the big promise is on one side, in collaboration, and that will be my main point. Our proposal, in fact, is to establish Central Eastern European Solidarity Trust based on these businesses that engage in venture philanthropy, in business philanthropy. And it's a completely new concept in Central Eastern Europe to do it from within, rather to be beneficiaries of the assistance from outside. And I believe that is possible. This is maybe actually being done. Second thing for sustainability that we can see is happening is actually digital. One of the first steps that businesses go, reach out to civil society is how do we build this interface? And what businesses are usually better at, although civil society have been engaged in the digital toolbox as well, is actually scaling up on the basis of information exchange, digital essentially marketing and management. And currently, there is, on the basis of civil society, initial mapping, service mapping exercises that have been carried out. There is an effort with major businesses from consultancy and also global companies that provide free software or IT specialists, building up, trying to scale up the service mapping that is just localized, to make it much bigger. And why? I believe it's sustainable because businesses look at it as a two-way win. On one hand, to deliver immediate relief and support the civil society. In the longer run, this is creating a market. This is about scaling up good cause, which is building up, of course, democratic environment, but it's also expanding the market potential. And for businesses, the engagement in civil society of that scale, at least in Poland, but I believe in other countries, it has a similar logic. It's a business opportunity. So there is a promise, but this promise may be fulfilled only when actually this works out on this next level. Yeah, and maybe I stop here.
That's great. Some really interesting insight for us to continue to think about sustainability. How do we sustain the collaboration across different sectors? So now I would like to open the floor and then welcome the audience to ask questions. And if I may ask to identify yourself first, and then so people know who you are, where you're from, and then ask your question. Thank you in advance for that. As I see a couple of hands, so if someone can help pass the mic. This one first, and then Mr. Hideki, and then that one.
Hello, my name is Mart from Greenhost, a small business in the Netherlands, and I'm based in Taipei. My question is, what do you think of new business models? Business ownership. So one of the things we are looking into is strategic ownership, where, steward ownership, where there's a separation between financial ownership and decision making, which maybe can guard the ideologies of a company and the decision making towards supporting civil society and other things. And it's not only about profit anymore. Is that something which is interesting, in your opinion, as a new future model for businesses?
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Hideki.
Thank you very much, Kathy. My name is Hideki Wakabayashi from Japan Think Lobby, a newly founded think tank in Japan, working on the democracy, human rights, including business human rights and civic space in Asia. So my question is, I was a little bit surprised that nobody has touched upon the business and human rights due diligence process, because guiding principle agreed by the United Nations has already included the stakeholder engagement, including civil society. So this is kind of powerful initiative. It's core value that you can, business sectors and stakeholders, civil society and other stakeholders can engage in, talk about human rights and peace and the kind of human rights due diligence process. I think why not work on this business human rights due diligence process in entire world to connect each other, work on the business and democracy issues. So I would like to see how you see these issues.
Great question. Thank you very much. And that gentleman there.
Good morning. My name is Joshua Mata. I'm from the Philippines. I work with the trade unions in the Philippines for a long, long time. Well, I actually agree that businesses should play a big role in advancing and deepening democracy in any country. And I'd like to pick up from what Mr. Hideki just said. I think one of the biggest problems, at least in my experience, one of the biggest problems back home is the fact that many businesses, with due respect to Makati Business Club, many businesses are actually not able, we are not able to hold to account many businesses for their human rights violations. So in that sense, why don't we step a bit further? Why don't we all both work together, the labor movement and business, to come up with a legally binding instrument that we have been trying to push for in the United Nations Human Rights Council for many years? I'd like to hear the opinion of the panelists. What do they think about a legally binding instrument for transnational corporations? Thank you.
And then this gentleman here. So we'll combine all the questions because we don't have that much time. So we'll combine all the questions and then ask the panelists to respond all at once. This gentleman here.
Thank you to all the panelists. My name is Parsifal de Sola. I am the head of the China Latin America Research Center of the Andrés Bello Foundation in Bogota. You've all stressed a lot of points about the private sector. Private sector is quite broad. Within the private sector, have you seen, where do you see the most potential? Are there any particular sectors of the private community that are more prone to the kind of activities that you mentioned? And again, which are the ones that you see more skeptical in actually engaging in these types of activities? Thanks.
Thank you all for these great questions. And then so if I can just ask the panelists to try to respond the questions to the best you can. I mean, these are fantastic questions, but they're also tough questions. So that I'm really happy the organizer gave us this opportunity to start the conversation, right? To really explore ways and then to identify what are the key ingredients for successful partnership between the private sector and civil society, right? So that's what we tried to find out today. So, you know, with all that questions, if you can also just finish up with kind of your final comment for this panel, like what are the key success lesson learned, key lesson learned for your success? That would be great. Would it be, you know, framing of the issue? How do you, communicate with the private sector in the language and then the framing, the terms that they could understand, they could accept, or what? Or maybe some other tips. So if I can also start with Catch.
Sure. Okay, let me just go over that very quickly. I think the three questions that we have today, they revolve around one issue, which is that business does not exist in a vacuum. So there's been recent developments. People are starting to understand more that you cannot do business when the world is on fire. You cannot do business when everybody is sick. So there's more and more realization that business does not exist in a vacuum. We live in a society. And in order for us to thrive, we also need to support that society. That's my key takeaway, I guess, in dealing with business. Answering the last question first, areas of cooperation. I think in this panel, I wouldn't say there's a specific sector of the business that's more prone to cooperation. I would say it's more on specific issues. So like in Uni's example, when it comes to corruption, that's an issue for everybody. It's an issue for the private sector. It's also an issue for business. When it comes to kind of governance gaps like COVID, like the Russian invasion, that's an issue for everybody. It's all encompassing. So I wouldn't say it's a specific part of the private sector, but rather the issues that you can look at and focus on. On Wakabayashi-san's point and the gentleman from the Philippines' point, so business and human rights is a key and important issue that we're trying to deal with in the Philippines. So Makati Business Club, we actually support the Commission on Human Rights in formulating their national action plan. So I was telling Wakabayashi-san yesterday that we hope that they do move forward with this and that they submit it to the UN soon. But yes, that's definitely something that we're open to exploring with you. This may take different models. Definitely, we'll need to work out exactly how we'll cooperate, but we're welcome to exploring it with you. Yeah, so I guess last words. Business and civil society have such large ways to cooperate. We have a lot of common ground, and I hope that we can all turn our creativity and all of our innovative energies towards finding those spaces so that we can all push forward the advocacies that are important to us as business and as civil society.
Thank you, Catch. Toki?
That was a great start that Catch gave to this, and you're absolutely right. I think we're all in a learning process. Even individually, we've all learned something from COVID. Things are being done differently. We're all charting new paths to follow. I think in terms about the question between the model that you were talking about, currently, at least in my country, you have it being practiced in the sense that you have non-government organizations setting up in a way that they have a revenue generating or activity or arm or project or subsidiary because they need the financial resources to do what they need to do in their civil engagements. And then they have the whole part around governance. Whether it's a model that would appeal to private sector, I'm not sure, because private sector is really, really about business. I mean, now the world is pushing a lot around CSR and what you're giving back to community, what you're doing about your environment, what you're doing about labor. So I think it's a conversation that we need to push forward on. In terms of legislation, honestly, not everything can be legislated. You really do need common agreement and a common push towards certain objectives. Otherwise, we would all have been legislated into doing all kinds of things. So I think in terms of the human rights is embedded in a lot of our various laws. It's not all in one document. You have bills of rights depending on whether you're looking at labor, business sectors. And I think it's just a common conversation. We have to have a vision as people, as nations, as sectors of society on how we pursue the common good. Is what we're thinking about. And I think in terms of last words, I think this is the beginning. I think we all should be leaving this conference further motivated and determined to find more areas of collaboration and agreement. I mean, that's how I feel. And begin to, walk that talk and there's it's a no-brainer that private sector and CSO should and must collaborate if we want to achieve scale, if we want to achieve impact, if we want to achieve reach. I think those are my last words. Thank you, Kathy.
That's great. Last word. Uni?
I just want to comment on the model of corporations where, the financial part and the other parts are separate. I'm not sure that's manageable, which also means that the other parts will always go haywire, do whatever they like, right? And the other one, then turn into NGO instead of changing things within. I'm not sure how does that work. At the end of the day, the responsibilities of governance, performance of a company, I think it stays on the board and shareholders. And shareholders, actually, well, if many of you owning shares here, it's it's our responsibility to ensure that our investment actually go to the right thing. Companies going somewhere, it's their company, but we are, as shareholders, have also right to determine where the directions of this company going. So I think it's important, that's why growing the business to be big and become publicly listed and they subject to greater discipline is very important. Because when you're small, usually SMEs, at least in the case of Malaysia, they don't really subject to many disciplines. They don't publish annual report. We don't know what's happening, being used for political reasons. But if they are publicly listed, they have become bigger. Of course, not all companies meant to be big, but the likelihood of them subjected to greater disciplines, even on human rights, is greater. And I think it's the obligation of shareholders to actually ensure that. On human rights, I think I agree with Toki. As much as we want to have a very uniform standard to subject companies, at the end of the day, UN declarations of human rights, for example, is subject to countries, not companies. But this principle can be adopted in any standards that countries can create it. I mean, EITI, for example, cost. I believe those standards on extractive industries, on construction industry, incorporate some of the human rights ideas. Mm-hmm. I mean, in Malaysia, palm oil is a controversial, and we are working with one of them, Sime Darby. And palm oil in Malaysia is no secret. They have foreign labor problem. They subject their labors to very low standards, and there's a tough glove, for example. It's very important business in Malaysia. They have really good anti-corruption, but at the same time, they also have lower standard. But I think, in our opinion, if we start making them enemies, the conversation will not go anywhere. So I believe, I think I like Toki's point, is engagement. Maybe we come to engage from different sectors or from different issues. Say, for example, in the case of Saib Darby, we come from Orang Asli. But it is also possible through this long engagement that we can communicate the importance of including human rights principles in this. It's a long journey. It will not happen in 1 or 2 years. But I think that's what it takes for a change to happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Uni. Wojciech?
Sorry, it's taking a long time for you.
No. Thank you. I think I have little to add, but I'll start where Toki mentioned that this cooperation is no-brainer. And I would add, yes, and we should not take it for granted. It's something to be earned and to be fought for. It takes time and effort, especially when governments don't provide a framework for that cooperation. And that is still so needed, and I think businesses are becoming aware of that, especially those that have agency, referring to the last question. The businesses that get engaged and how they get engaged are the businesses that feel they have some agency. That usually comes more naturally with being placed, being kind of grown out of the place where they operate, rather than being these multinational or dislocated companies. There is, of course, an answer to that, how to get the multinational or big companies, very successful companies engaged, and there are the frameworks of human rights, but I think companies prefer something more specific, and today we didn't mention the ESG or ESGT even discussion on environments, society, governance, and technology as aspects of the business's responsibility for the environment they co-create. And my last point, probably not answering all the questions, but they've been addressed already by my fantastic co-panelists, is that business needs some rules, not too many rules, but business needs rules, needs framework in which they can plan, operate, and thrive. And interestingly enough, I think they're now seeing, more often than not, a civil society are the guardians and fighters for the rules. And making this alliance or making this transgression sometimes creates the greatest and the utmost outputs that were never expected before. And I think these cases that we've been providing, including the one in which collaboration happens with businesses and civil society in the refugee response in Poland and Central Europe, but also so many others, provide testimony to that there is a space to explore, not taken for granted, but absolutely no-brainer. Thank you.
Thank you, Wojciech. I think today's panelists all share great insights about how to work together with civil society organizations. And I think this goes back to kind of the very beginning of what CIPE stands for, or what democracy organization stands for. It's to make democracy delivers. So to make democracy delivers, you need the private sector's participation into the whole process. And a functional market economy then reinforce and solidify democracy. So then they're intertwined. It's a symbiotic relationship. And I think, as a true believer of that, growing up in Taiwan, I think Taiwan is a successful example of that, and as many examples that panelists have shared today. And so I left inspired by all the great works that the panelists have shared, but I think we also highlighted a few kind of entry point for us to start the conversation, to start the engagement. Then we can then form the collaboration later on. So I think as the Dhaka Assembly indicated or discussed, that the cross-sectoral engagement and collaboration really is key to advance democracy around the world. And that's why we are all here talking about this particular issue. And so, and I really appreciate all the questions from the audience. So CIPE is here, our panelists are here. So if after the forum, you would like to discuss, brainstorm, find ways to collaborate and to really do more together, to join forces and to really fight for democracy around the world, we're happy, to really work with you anywhere. So fighting for democracy, right? So that's why we're all here. So thank you all very much for joining us today for the great discussion. And thank you again for the panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Alia Ibrahim. I am co-founder of a Beirut-based independent media named Daraj. When 5 years ago my co-founders and myself decided to launch this media owned by journalists addressing Arabic speakers around the world, we were told by everybody we knew that we were completely crazy. This was the moment when the Arab Spring had derailed completely. It had turned into the nightmare it had become in Syria and Libya and Yemen and Egypt. And for us, it was the moment where, as journalists, we were feeling we not only were not part of the solution, we were part of the problem. And that problem was not in the non-existence of journalists or journalism that believes in the fundamentals of holding power into account, of giving voice for marginalized groups. It was in the ownership of the media. So the solution for us was very simple, just work on media owned by journalists. And when people told us we were crazy, we looked for examples, and examples existed. Mediapart and the correspondents were already there. But it was really Rappler that for us was an incredible inspiration and an incredible validation for our then project. It was there, it was already doing what we wanted to do on the other side of the planet, and it gave us the justification. So I'm saying all this to say how important it is for me to be here today with a personal hero and a personal role model and an inspiration. And it's really very genuine. So thank you to anyone who made that possible. And we have so much to discuss today, just in now a little bit less than 30 minutes. So Maria, thank you for being here. It's a great opportunity to be having this conversation here in Taiwan and with everything that is happening around us. Let's go into it. Yesterday you said we're in the last 20 minutes of democracy. And previously you said an atomic bomb has hit our information ecosystem. Where do we take it from there? How do we defend journalism? How do we defend this industry we love so much and push back against everything that's happening?
I mean, on all fronts, right? And it's the last 2 minutes. You guys play basketball? Last 2 minutes, and we are losing this game of democracy. So, I mean, part of what we've tried to do in Rappler, first of all, thank you so much. The person who did a lot of the research for us, our head of research, Gemma Mendoza, is also here. So, I mean, it's like throwing spaghetti against the wall. You know this, if you're a startup founder, if you're trying to reinvent what civic engagement looks like, what journalism looks like in the age of exponential lies, how do we, your question is, so what do we do, right? I mean, let me go directly to what do we do. Yesterday I talked about, right before Ann Applebaum told you what the real world looks like, right? How geopolitical power play has shifted to networks. I mean, Belarus, for example, would Belarus be a democracy today if Russia hadn't come in? Yes. Would other countries that are on the verge tip towards democracy or autocracy Inc.? Well, it's still power and money. So, countries like the Philippines, which is in between, countries in the global south, which are trying to make it work. I mean, it's so interesting what's going on in your country and your own reporting, right? What a long preamble. Why don't I just show you what did work for us? And I'm gonna fast forward through a bunch of this stuff, right? Because in the end, this is what I had actually said. So first of all, let's just go back to this, right? This is the way information operations work. And let's put it in the United States before we bring it back home, because if you are on social media and you're working in a democracy that is slowly tipping, this is happening to you. This is from the Election Integrity Partnership, where you can see how disinformation is seeded and then how it comes bottom up, a lie a million times, and then comes top down. This is Stop the Steal. This is election fraud. This is happening in Brazil now. And you can look at what the Election Integrity Partnership saw when they looked at the data. We stick to evidence-based, fact-based. You actually see that Stop the Steal was seeded a year earlier in August 2019, not surprisingly, in RT. And then the mainstreaming began here. Again, is it a surprise? It was on Steve Bannon on YouTube. The mainstreaming then here, we saw Tucker Carlson bring it out to the super spreaders, QAnon. And then finally, so it comes up this way and then comes top down with then former President Trump saying the same thing and calling people out, and that is what we saw happen. Right? So so the last 2 minutes that I talked about at the beginning yesterday was really to take what Anne is telling us is happening in the physical world and show you what has happened in the virtual world. And the main problem is that the technology that supposedly connects us, at the time when journalists owned distribution, this could never have happened because we were liable, legally liable, for protecting the public sphere. Now, no one is legally liable for protecting this public sphere. And what is the problem? That our minds, what we think of the world, is being insidiously manipulated through our emotions. That's how come social media is now a weapon for information warfare. We talked about this. I mean, Taiwan knows this. Ukraine certainly knows this in 2014. Ukraine started sounding the alarm. The Philippines started sounding the alarm. We tend to always be the testing ground. If the United States is under attack, it comes first through the Philippines. It's now a behavior modification system. You say a lie 1,000,000 times. And it's not a free speech issue, right? Because free speech, pounding you to silence. We've had both of these attacks happen to us, and the end goal, like with Crimea, like with Ukraine, is to suppress and then replace. So 2-step, 3-step process: suppress, replace, and then mainstream, right? So what are the 3 layers? World War III today is happening, not just the conventional warfare that is happening in Ukraine, that is happening, that Taiwan oftentimes prepares for, but it is also an individual war, an individual battle for the truth in each of our minds. That is where this modern war is being fought. So it is first personal, it's the impact on you psychologically. This stuff is mildly addictive, increased levels of dopamine when you're on it, and the end goal is to keep you scrolling. But when your mind changes, when we are in groups, it becomes sociological. And then the big thing, we've never had 3.2 billion in one platform. Emergent human behavior with an incentive structure that rewards the liar, that rewards the lies over the truth teller. That's the first part. The second part, why is it the last 2 minutes in this democracy? Because if you don't have integrity of facts, you don't have integrity of elections, right? If you don't know the facts, how are you going to vote for the right person? How are you going to choose? Where is agency? And that's where we are already. We're already at the tail end. And yesterday I laid out the elections that are there. Some of you guys tweeted, please use hashtag WM11 Assembly. But you tweeted your own elections coming up. So this shift is happening already. It is individual. I'm telling you the problem again. Let me spin through all of this stuff. If you want data, go to my Twitter feed, because I actually punched out a bunch of data with the hashtag so you can see it. This is the way we began to fight it in Rappler, and it'll be interesting to hear also about theraj.com. It's a dual funnel. Just like Anne Applebaum told you about the physical world, there is also a virtual world. We only live in one world, and the fact that we have rule of law in the physical world, but no rule of law, impunity in the virtual world, it is what has caused the erosion of rule of law. But for Rappler, we took it as a dual funnel, right? There's the digital funnel, and then there's the physical civic engagement funnel, and we can talk about that more. This is what we wound up doing. It worked. This is our MVP, not most valuable player, but minimum viable product that I want to push, I want to encourage our movement to look at, and perhaps to set up at a global landscape. Only 3 months in operation, a 4-layer pyramid that is a whole of society approach. It starts with 16 news groups. We've never all worked together like this in the Philippines because competition always got in the way. Well, we did here, and it was a Creative Commons license, so anyone can publish it. And we also had a data layer that went through all of it. Midan, if you're a fact checker, you know that this is a data platform. So every one of the 16, like every one of you in the room, tells your followers, tells your community, tell us if you see any lies that you want fact checked, send it here. And when it's sent to that first layer, everyone sees it all the way up to the top layer. And then we meta tag it, right? Then the fact checks go out. Let's say each news group does 30 fact checks a month. That's the supply. The second layer is called the mesh. And this is our way of fighting back now, because legislation doesn't really kick in until spring 2023, and then education is like the next generation already coming up. So now the mesh layer is about more than 100 civil society groups, NGOs, business. For the first time, business came in. Oh my God, I cannot begin to tell you how long it took us to work on that. And then the big thing is the church. And what is the mesh supposed to do? To take those very boring fact checks, because they never spread on social media, and share them with emotion, with a very specific ask from all of us to stay away from anger and hate. And guess, like with Ukraine, like with people who inspire you, inspiration spread as far as anger, hate, and fear. Right? So that's the mesh. And then the third layer was research. 8 research groups with the data that we had, and every week they came out with like a webinar that showed you this is who is what is the meta-narrative that's being pushed into the public sphere, who is being targeted, who is gaining. It was always inevitably the opposition leader, the vice president, a woman, Leni Robredo, was always targeted, in fact, since 2016, and who was winning? Marcos. It was very, very interesting. And then finally, but we took it cross-platform, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, all the way across, because when you have more than one working together with the same data set, you can actually go through. And the last one, layer 4, was the most important one, and they were the most adamant. They were also the most energized because they hadn't really been fighting for the last 6 or 7 years like the journalists were. The law. The legal groups, law firms, the Philippine Bar Association, the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. In fact, let me show you what that looks up. Sorry, I didn't actually put it in. So that law firm, all the law firms filed actually they filed more than 21 tactical and strategic cases in less than 3 months. Movement against disinformation set up by lawyers. It was incredible to try to bring back rule of law. This is the impact. We know it worked. Well, within the first 2 weeks of doing this pyramid, it's called the Facts First PH pyramid, and I did the same thing that I'm doing to you. It's like, it is it. This is the last 2 minutes. It's an Avengers Assemble moment, right? You have to take all your superpowers, and we did. So look at that. On the left here, this is the main network of the news organizations, but then you put that here, and then you can see the ripple effect. We mapped the impact. And we've been doing this since 2016, and we have never been able to reclaim the center of our information ecosystem in the Philippines. We did this time. And the first inkling we knew that it was successful was within the first 2 weeks that we rolled it out, the Philippine government, the Office of the Solicitor General, filed a petition at the Supreme Court against Rappler and the Commission on Elections, saying that fact-checking is prior restraint. You're laughing. It is laughable, right? But thankfully, the Supreme Court didn't do anything, and we would have kept doing it. Would you have let, prior restraint on fact-checking stop you? What does that do, right? These were I'll just end with these last 2 slides, which is the mesh layer, right? They did things like this. They took what the journalists did, and they made it accessible. We're kind of boring. We're grim and determined oftentimes, right? But look at what they did. Cartoons, artwork, TikTok explainers. I am not on TikTok, but Rappler is. So is these 2 are influencers in their own way. One is a mother who looks at history. And then the newspapers, our other partners, actually did weekend full-page spreads of fact checks, and their circulation increased. And there was even a billboard. And finally, this is the last thing, we reversed the research, because normally research on disinformation takes forever. By the time it comes out, it's like it's like a weapons race, arms race, right? By the time it comes out, it's too late. What we did is we asked them, because they were coming up with the data, we asked them to first publish it before they submit it for peer review. So 2 of these 21 research reports only 1 has come out after peer review, but they all came out in time for our election. So it is from the bottom up, emotions, intellect, law. That's our whole of society.
But Maria, you raised so many amazing topics that I would like to ask you about.
Sure.
But let's stress on one thing. You did this amazing initiative. At the end of the day, it's a game of time also, and the president won.
Yes.
We always seems to be 5 steps behind.
Yes.
And here there are 2 main issues. I think that it's brilliant that this retelling stories in as many formats as possible to reach as wider audiences as possible is incredibly good. But bad news and fake news still flies faster. And
Yes.
we know that through data.
By
And
design.
algorithms.
By design.
So what do we do like when we're in this ecosystem and we're trying to work on the journalism? And I think one point that needs to be raised here, when you as Rappler, as a journalistic priority, when journalism is your priority, when you're working so much with civil society, where do you draw the line?
I love your question.
Where do we really stick to the journalism and make sure that even our partners are being held accountable?
We always draw the line, and I think that's the difference. The standards and ethics manuals of journalism are very clear, right? So we had a whole discussion about this, but let me quickly say what it is. I no longer have an editorial position in Rappler when I came under attack, because at some point, I had 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years. Right? This is my 36th year as a journalist, and I have worked for, I spent almost 20 years with CNN International at the golden age of journalism, and then headed the largest network in the Philippines, and then we started Rappler. I could never have thought we would be where we are today. So how do you draw the line? I no longer, after the first time I was arrested, and they made a point to actually, I remember the date, February 13th, 2019, because it was Valentine's Day the next day. So it was my government's gift to me. They made sure to arrest me at 5 o'clock so that this way I couldn't post bail. I knew, because worst case scenario, that there was a municipal court that was open until 9 o'clock, but they delayed it, so I was detained overnight. And when I came out the next morning and I was forced to, the arrest warrant didn't even have an amount for bail. That's how much it was rushed. So the next morning, I was furious, but when you're furious, that's when you smile. So I was furious, and that's when I realized that the pettiness of the way this will work, that they will bend it to the point, to the point that it's broken, and it's quite petty. So that's when I realized that I'm not just a journalist, I'm a citizen. And I am a citizen who is being targeted, and I was going to hold my government to account. To answer your question, how do you draw the line? I do tech, data. I take care of our business. The editorial is completely separate. For me, in terms of our civic engagement, this goes all the way to the beginning of Rappler in 2012. We actually, instead of marketing, I didn't put in a marketing budget. What I did was create a civic engagement arm, which is separate from the editorial team. That civic engagement arm works with government.
And they're completely separated?
They're separate from us. They run campaigns with government. So for example, some of the wonderful things we did was, climate change. The Philippines, starting in 2013, is the 3rd most disaster-prone country in the world. So we worked very closely. We worked closely with our Department of Social Welfare and Development in terms of trying to stop stunting hunger. We called it the Hunger Project. We did one step better than India's IPaidAbribe.com by working with our Commission on Audit. And we did a crowdfunding of report bribery, right? Because the government itself said, our COA, Commission on Audit, actually said that only 20% of the bribes are reported. So we opened a portal, we built a portal, and then when they reported, It was the government who responded to them. We enabled government. This is our civic engagement arm. So I paid a bribe, you just report it, but you don't close the loop on government acting on it. And for a period of time until the Duterte administration came into power, we were doing bottom-up anti-corruption campaigns. This is the civic engagement arm again. Okay, while that is happening, and I'll give you a perfect example, Super Typhoon Haiyan, which is the way the global community knows it, but for us it was Typhoon Yolanda. In Typhoon Yolanda, one of our Move PH is the civic engagement arms. One of our partner was the Secretary of Social Welfare and Development, Dinky Soliman. So she goes to the hardest hit area. And she's there, right? Our Move PH actually sits in the crisis team because we created a panel where people can crowd report any kinds of problems they have in a typhoon. So she goes, but then we have our reporter there. And I don't think this is necessarily a point of pride, but our reporter asks such tough questions that Move PH's partner, the secretary, cried. I mean, and they were normal questions, right? When we were there, this was in Leyte, where the eye of the storm was, Rappler had a satellite, an IP satellite van, but no one else brought satellite phones. I mean, how do you not do that in the middle of a typhoon? So that's the separation. There's a separate group that worked with government, that organizes civil society. The way I thought about it before was that Rappler builds communities of action. The food we feed our communities is journalism, so it is fact-based, evidence-based.
But let me stop you here, Maria. Today we are looking at crisis across the globe, and as journalism, we are faced with this crisis of reporting today between Ukraine, Iran, what's happening. In that context, where do we draw the line? How do we answer to the pushback when it comes to sticking to journalism in conflict zones?
I mean, first of all, whose definition of journalism? This idea, so I have a book coming out in November, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, right? I stand for human rights. I stand for press freedom. As a journalist, these are not things that I throw out. And this idea of faux objectivity, even when I was with CNN, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I was used to think, hello, no one is objective. I'm a 5'2" Filipino American. That's the way I will analyze the world. But what is objective is the process of journalism where the reporter has an editor, the editor has a managing editor, and then if it is a particularly sensitive story, you have legal go over it, right? So it is the system of news groups that is frankly quite expensive that technology platforms don't have. But you know what? I'm fascinated because you've lived through some tough experiences. You should tell them why this whole idea of drawing the line is also important to you.
Well, we were talking about this, and yes, I am particularly passionate about this because I covered Syria.
Yes, go.
And in Syria, when I did my job, and my position on Syria was 100% very, very clear against the dictator. But when I was covering on the ground, and it was 2013, beginning of Jabhat al-Nusra, Daesh did not exist yet, but you could see where things were going. And I reported on what I saw. And I ended up getting out of Syria. Even being with armed militias, I did not feel scared. I felt scared because the social media context got me out of Syria with a fatwa to kill me because I was accused of being against the revolution and against what was happening there. People who were journalists and writers, etc., told me this was not the time to be critical or to say what I was saying. And I raise this point now because really I think we're facing the same issues today.
And the way, go.
There is the journalism, and there is where we stand morally and of course politically.
Well,
but the journalism sticking to the reporting.
And I will respond to this exactly the way I responded to it when we talked, which is that in the end, the journalist in any conflict must report the facts. That is why this is a battle for facts. And you reported the facts, and it was actually the people who believed the same things you did that attacked you, right? And then where did the attacks happen? On social media, right? So let me take that apart. So the first thing is, as a reporter in a conflict zone, regardless of what you think, you report what you see. right? That is why you go to these conflict zones. That's first. Regardless of what you think, the way other people interpret it, frankly, is not our problem.
But
right?
but the narratives are being set.
Oh yeah, but that goes back to the basic problem of social media, right? What spreads fastest? Fear, anger, hate. Who are attacked the most? Women in the Philippines, starting in 2017, this is data, were attacked at least 10 times more than men.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to stop your reporting. So what did they do? They attacked you. Was it information operations? If it was Syria, maybe, most likely we would have to look at the data. But that is different from how we do our jobs, what we do, regardless of what we believe, right? So my equivalent in the Philippines was, Rappler was the first organization to give then Mayor Duterte a nationwide stage. We live streamed all 5. There were 5 candidates for president. He attended our presidential debate. And the people who campaigned against Duterte after he won then blamed Rappler for his win. That's bias is in the eye of the beholder. You know, what we did was we were fair, because that is fairness, that is part of the standards and ethics manual. We are transparent about our standards and ethics manuals, about our values. We align with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with the Philippine Constitution, and we hold those lines. So for others to feel that's an opinion, they can have it. In the old days, when news organizations were in charge of the public sphere, our organizations can get in front of it, and a lie couldn't spread 1 million times to become a fact, right? So the dangers, I mean, look, the president of Taiwan shared a photo of of all of us coming together to meet her, right? And then I just saw all the attacks against her, including her head being placed on a woman in a bikini, right? Like very salacious, misogynistic things. Why is this legal? Why, sorry, now I sound like that. But I'm just saying this happens to every reporter and every woman politician. If you're LGBTQ, if you were marginalized before in the real world, these attacks get worse in the virtual world.
We don't have much time left, but you worked for CNN.
Yes.
And now you champion for independent media. Distribution is much easier for mainstream, and getting the message through is much easier for mainstream. Why do you think independent media, in this very noisy world, with the technology and algorithms and distribution challenges, why do you think, why Rappler was your choice?
And this is why I also co-chair the International Fund for Public Interest Media, which is to try to get democratic countries to increase 0.3% of ODA to 1% so that we can give it to independent media. My co-chair is the former Director General of the BBC and the former president of the New York Times. Okay, so there are 2 reasons why, and I see that we have 15 seconds left. Reason number 1 is that independent media doesn't have other ownership. So you just saw the one with business and civil society. Well, businesses, corporate media tends to have a lot more interest. Not to say that you're not independent corporate media. I came from corporate media, but independent media, young, scrappy. Like, why did Rappler stand up? We have no other businesses. We have no other interests to protect. And before we came out with our weaponization of the internet series, I actually asked for board approval because it was exposing something that was insidiously manipulating us behind the scenes. The second thing is, corporate media moves too slowly, and this is why we need to move faster. When I was managing ABS-CBN, which is the largest network in the Philippines, largest news organization, about 1,000 journalists, and it would take, from idea to execution, 6 months is fast. You know that, 6 months is fast. In Rappler, 1 week, idea to execution. So you can try a lot of things, and that's part of what we need to do in this day and age where, frankly, It's not just independent journalism or journalism under attack. Oh, by the way, did we mention that these very same platforms have killed the business model of journalism, right? Advertising is dead, and we must find another sustainable business model. And this kind of thing where you have autocracy Inc., and then you have the manipulation of our emotions and minds, we're just the punching bag. And this is part of the reason we need civil society. We cannot do this without you.
Well, I want to end on a happy...
we must end happy.
So we are taking more time, but the last 2 minutes, how far are we from losing or winning in the game? So make it optimistic. Are we going to win?
It depends on you. We are certainly doing all we can. I could go to jail for the rest of my life. You have to ask yourself the question, what are you willing to sacrifice? Because this time is when you can be a force for good, and silence or apathy becomes a force for evil. How's that? Does it work? Please act. We must do something. Oh yeah, we're live streaming this. You too. You must also act. You gotta ask yourself. We're in the last 2 minutes. And I think the journalists have done our jobs.
Well, we keep doing
We keep trying, but it's almost like we're just putting our finger in the dam and it's about to collapse. Citizens must step up. And we have to stop being what the tech companies call users or consumers. We must demand integrity of information. I feel bad for governments. They can't govern if you do not have integrity of facts. So let's demand it.
Well, I'll end on that. Thank you so much. Where I'm standing, despite as bleak as the situation is in the Middle East, we're still doing what we can, and it's not game over yet.
Not at all.
So,
not at all.
Thank you very much. This has been a fantastic opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Alia. When you are listening to very interesting conversation, time flies. I didn't think it was only 30 minutes, but now it's time for coffee break. And after that, I'd like you to join different workshops that you sign up for. How do you find out where the workshops are? Check the apps. So thank you very much, and see you in the workshop.